Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Michella Welch. Some of the most terrifying villains in forensic history are serial criminals, individuals who commit horrific murders that devastate entire communities. These criminals can even become symbols for cults. Finding such ruthless offenders can be extremely challenging, but thankfully, police now have access to advanced technology that aids their investigations. This technology enables them to solve cases that have stumped detectives for years. However, as current events demonstrate, the evidence does not always support even the boldest theories proposed by the police. The events unfolded in Tacoma, Washington, in the spring of 1986. Michella Welch was born on June 7, 1973, and by that time, she was 12 years old. She lived in the city with her family, which included her two younger sisters, Angela and Nicole. As the oldest child, Michelle took on a significant role in the family. Their father had passed away shortly before these events, leaving their mother to raise the children alone. During this challenging time, she worked very hard to support her family and manage their financial difficulties. Despite facing challenges, she was a knowledgeable expert in her field and successfully secured a good job at a real estate agency. She worked hard, and her salary was enough to support herself and her children while also allowing her to save a little for their future. To assist with childcare, she hired a nanny, which enabled her to enroll all her daughters in piano lessons. Michelle particularly appreciated this, as the nanny was viewed by her family as reliable and responsible. However, her relatives noted that she possessed a unique trait: she was fearless. As Michelle approached her teenage years, she had just a couple of months until her birthday, which would signify an important milestone in her life. During this time, Michelle, eager for freedom and independence, did not want to distance herself from her family. Instead, she aimed to show her mother that she was mature and responsible as an older sister. To demonstrate this, she felt confident about going to the park with her younger sisters, despite being quite young herself. Eventually, their mother agreed to let them go, persuaded by Michelle's arguments. On March 26, 1986, the weather was beautiful, signaling the arrival of spring. Their mother left for work in the morning, while Michelle and her sisters planned their outing. This day was particularly important for Michelle. After all the children woke up, she helped her younger siblings get ready. They intended to spend a few hours at the park, leaving home around 10 a.m. and riding their bicycles to the nearby cultural center, Puget Sound. Although they were on their own, the schoolgirls were still under the watchful eye of their older sister. At that time, the park was a peaceful and quiet place, surrounded by houses and people. Since their outing wouldn't take long, their mother felt comfortable letting them go. She was proud of Michelle for growing up and wanted to support her in showcasing her best qualities. The children arrived at the park and played for a while but soon realized they had forgotten their lunch boxes at home. To ensure the younger ones wouldn't go hungry, Michelle decided to quickly go back home and get the lunch boxes. At around 11 o'clock, she got on her bicycle and asked her sisters to stay at the playground and wait for her. Michelle then rode off to fetch the lunch boxes. While she was gone, the younger children, who were unsupervised, needed to use the restroom. They went to the nearest restroom in the park, as they knew the area well. When the younger children returned, they couldn't find their older sister. However, Angela and Nicole saw Michelle's bicycle next to theirs. They assumed she must have come back but thought she was either looking for them or using the restroom. The sisters began searching for her and soon noticed the lunch boxes sitting on a picnic bench. It became clear that Michelle had returned home first before coming back, so they decided to wait for her there. After having a snack, the sisters kept calling out for Michelle. At ages 9 to 11, Angela and Nicole found themselves alone and unsupervised in a forested area. Unlike today, there were no mobile phones or CCTV cameras available, They called out for their older sister, Michelle, but received no response. Eventually, they decided to go to the main entrance, thinking Michelle might be waiting for them there after losing track of them. They joked about the situation, believing they had separated because of restroom breaks, not realizing the seriousness of their predicament. Due to this delay, they spent a significant amount of time at the main entrance. It was time for music school, but the nanny, who had come to their house, couldn't find them. However, she knew they were at the park and quickly drove there. She was relieved to find Angela and Nicole at the main entrance, but Michelle was still missing. The nanny listened to the girls' account of what had happened and began searching the area for any signs of Michelle. While they were standing there, all three shouted for a long time, trying to report that the 12-year-old girl was missing. However, as is often the case, the police did not take their concerns seriously at first. The officers believed that at her age, Michelle might have taken advantage of being unsupervised and decided to go somewhere on her own, perhaps to meet a friend, and lost track of time. They reassured her mother that the girl would be fine and would return soon. Unfortunately, this was not true. That day was very important for Michelle, the older daughter. She was responsible and had plans to prove herself. Michelle would not have left her sisters alone for long, so something must have happened to her. It was crucial to act quickly. The mother managed to convince the officers that the situation was urgent, prompting them to take action and begin searching for Michelle. The search focused on the park, and several police officers were assigned to the operation. They arrived with service dogs, but during a quick inspection, they found no signs of the child. Volunteers joined the search, and the mother participated while the younger girls stayed with a nanny. She hoped to find her daughter soon, fearing that Michelle might have fallen off her bike and could be injured and unable to reach the playground. The police had no false hopes. After investigating the crime scene, detectives believed that Michelle had been attacked and abducted when no one was around. By midnight on the same day, all of her mother's hopes were dashed when police and search dogs found a remote path in the park where an extinguished fire was located. There, the body of a 12-year-old girl was discovered. Michelle had been brutally murdered. Some of her clothing was torn off, while the rest was in tatters, indicating that she had been sexually assaulted. The autopsy by a forensic expert confirmed that Michelle had endured horrific sexual abuse and severe physical violence. Most of her injuries were on her head and neck, and her throat had been cut. Evidence at the scene indicated a struggle and that she had been lured in before the attack. However, the knife used in the murder could not be found. Police searched the entire area with dogs, but the suspect likely took the murder weapon with them and discarded it elsewhere. It's hard to fathom the grief of the mother who received such devastating news. She had wanted to give her eldest daughter an opportunity to show her strength, but tragically, it ended in a heartbreaking loss. The younger daughters likely avoided a similar fate by mere coincidence, perhaps being in the restroom more out of sight of the attacker. The abduction and murder of Michelle created a nightmare for the entire community. Everyone was on edge, knowing that this criminal could strike again, leaving no one feeling secure. The police received numerous calls from the public urging them to apprehend the killer so that the community could feel safe again. However, the officers had no leads, so they reached out to the public for assistance. They needed more information to locate the suspect. On the same day, a 13-year-old girl who knew the victim contacted the detectives. She reported seeing the missing girl and her younger sisters playing in the park that morning. Before Michelle left, the girl noticed a man watching the children from a distance. Although he did not act aggressively, he suspiciously followed them for an extended period. Unfortunately, the young witness was unable to warn the girls about the potential danger because she was with her parents and had to leave. Nevertheless, her testimony allowed the police to create a detailed sketch of the possible suspect. This drawing became the only lead for law enforcement. After the sketch was released to the public, another witness, a man who had been jogging in the park that morning, contacted the police. However, he had been exercising in a different park, located 5 kilometers away from the initial park. According to him, one person who wandered there bore a striking resemblance to the photo fit. He did not arouse any suspicions with his behavior. In any case, this indicated that the probable criminal did not just run into the child by coincidence but visited various parks where he was looking for a victim. The investigation into Michelle's death lasted 5 months. Considering the lack of effective means of investigation at that time, the police only shrugged their shoulders, struggling to find anything valuable, and even more so, to locate the criminal was not found. According to him, one person who was seen in the area resembled the composite sketch. His behavior did not raise any suspicions. This suggests that the possible criminal may not have randomly encountered the child. Instead, he was visiting various parks in search of a victim. The investigation into Michelle's death lasted 5 months, but due to limited investigative resources at the time, the police struggled to find any valuable leads and were unable to locate the suspect. Tragically, after 5 months, another girl went missing under similar circumstances. This incident occurred in Pond Inns Park and involved 13-year-old Jennifer Bastian, who was born on April 15, 1973, and also lived in Tam. The incident was devastating for her family and the local community. There was widespread shock and anger that the police had failed to protect another child. Jennifer was remembered as a cheerful and energetic schoolgirl with a passion for various activities, including horse riding, dancing, and gymnastics. One of her favorite pastimes was cycling, which she enjoyed to build her endurance as she loved sports. Law enforcement officers received information about a possible sighting and quickly responded. They realized that this situation resembled the earlier disappearance of Michelle. The search focused on a park where Jennifer was last seen skating. Police brought search dogs to assist, but the park was much larger than the one previously searched, making it difficult for the dogs to detect her scent. Despite their efforts, the officers and search dogs could not find the missing girl that day. Some witnesses reported seeing Jennifer riding her bike on a park path around 6 p.m., but they did not notice anything unusual. However, news of the situation spread rapidly, causing widespread panic. Many people believed the second disappearance was linked to Michelle's case, leading to rumors about a possible serial child rapist or killer. This prompted an investigation and an appeal for public help through the media. Many volunteers joined the search, and the parents of Jennifer made a formal request, urging anyone with information to contact the police. After seeing the news about Jennifer's disappearance, Michelle's mother, who was still grieving her daughter's death, reached out to the police. Michelle's case had been unsolved for 5 months, and upon hearing about Jennifer, she felt a deep empathy for her family. Having experienced a similar loss less than 6 months ago, she wanted to offer her support. During this time, the police were reluctant to declare Jennifer dead, as everyone hoped she had simply run away to be with friends, possibly due to problems at home. However, these thoughts were only attempts to ease their worries, as such behavior was not typical for Jennifer. Despite the efforts of the police and volunteers, they could not find any useful information about Jennifer until August 26. On that day, a man reported to the police after his morning jog through the park's quiet paths. He mentioned that in a secluded area of the forest, he noticed a strong, unbearable smell of decomposition. Although he didn't investigate further, he recalled that Jennifer had gone missing in that same location weeks earlier. He contacted the police as soon as he got home, and investigators promptly headed to the area he described. It was difficult to find the source of the foul smell, and after 2 days of searching, investigators discovered the child's body near a pedestrian path in a dense forest. Alongside the body, they also found the schoolgirl's bicycle. Unfortunately, the body was in a severely decomposed state, having been exposed to the heat for about 3 weeks. It was well hidden in a small depression, covered with leaves and branches, which is why it went unnoticed until the strong odor became evident. Due to the extensive decomposition, immediate identification was impossible. The detectives did not rush to inform Jennifer's parents that their daughter had been found. Instead, they asked them to identify her. The father recognized his daughter's clothes immediately. Forensic analysis later confirmed that Jennifer had been sexually assaulted. The autopsy revealed she had been raped and died from strangulation. Her body was positioned in a way that indicated the attacker had carefully planned the assault. Her trousers had been pulled down to her ankles, and her hands showed multiple defensive injuries, indicating that she had fought back fiercely against her attacker. Tragically, the young schoolgirl lacked the strength to overcome the brutal violence of her assailant. The details of the crime shocked the public. The worst fears were confirmed, as people quickly linked this crime to the murder of Michelle. Both incidents involved sexual motives, and both schoolgirls were attacked while riding their bicycles in parks. However, the circumstances of their deaths were notably different. The first victim had her throat cut and was severely beaten, while the second was strangled without visible injuries. Despite these differences, the similarities in their deaths raised alarm, especially since both girls were attractive, blue-eyed children of the same age. Local families with children were terrified. What was once a peaceful town with low crime rates had become a site of horrific violence against children. Parents were afraid to let their kids play outside. The community pressured law enforcement to urgently capture the perpetrator. Unfortunately, despite gathering evidence like clothing fragments, signs of sexual assault, and samples from under the victim's fingernails, there were no effective DNA analysis technologies available at that time. Days of waiting for the killer's arrest turned into years, and eventually decades. In the fall of 2008, Tacoma's administration established a department dedicated to investigating unsolved crimes. By then, several advanced methods had emerged, such as DNA analysis, genetic genealogy, phenotyping, and other forensic techniques. Law enforcement officials believed these technologies could significantly help solve many cold cases that had remained unresolved for decades. In 2013, the department finally revisited the unsolved murders of Michelle and Jennifer, which occurred 27 years earlier. Detective Lindsay Waite volunteered to take on this investigation, feeling a deep connection to the tragic events surrounding the girls. Although she did not know them personally, she had grown up in the same area when the murders took place. Lindsay was around the same age as the victims, which made her acutely aware that she could have been in their situation. Growing up in an environment filled with fear, she understood that a ruthless killer was at large in the parks, posing a constant threat. For over 2 decades, this individual had evaded capture, but with the introduction of new, advanced investigative tools, Lindsay felt hopeful that the culprit could finally be identified and brought to justice. These horrific crimes motivated her to become a police officer, and she had harbored a passion for forensics since childhood, always dreaming of bringing criminals to justice. Lindsay had made significant progress in her career, rising from a patrol officer to a detective. She had worked on many cases, but the murders of 2 schoolgirls continued to haunt her. With the help of her team, she compiled a list of 2,300 men who had a history of sexual crimes and violence, all of whom lived near the murder locations. This list also included individuals who had been near the crime scenes or had connections to the girls in the year of the murders. Although police found a substantial amount of evidence at the victims' locations, the technology of that time could not yield usable results. However, they did analyze DNA collected from both crime scenes. In an unexpected twist, investigators, who had believed that a single perpetrator was responsible due to the similarities in the cases, discovered that the DNA profiles did not match. It was discovered that 2 dangerous child killers had been living in Tacoma for 20 years without harming anyone else, possibly because they had moved to other cities. Although DNA profiles were created and added to the police database, none matched the known criminals, leaving detectives disappointed. Manually collecting profiles from 2,300 individuals was impractical and would have taken years. To streamline the investigation, Lindsay began narrowing down the list of suspects. She eliminated those who didn't match the description, reducing the number to 160 priority candidates, most of whom had a history of sexual or violent offenses. Unfortunately, not all of them were still alive by the time the investigation resumed. Efforts were made to locate the remaining suspects, and genealogy methods were employed to find potential matches using the DNA profiles of the criminals' relatives. Unfortunately, this approach did not provide any results for Shelley. However, the situation was different for Jennifer. Genealogists suggested that her killer might have the last name Nama Holbrook, Smith, or Washburn. They were eventually able to identify one potential match, Robert Washington. Despite this, he was not considered a suspect in the murder case. In fact, he was a witness who contacted the police to report seeing a suspicious man in the park after the first victim, Michelle, was killed. This suspicious individual was a runner, which raised further concerns. After the murder of the second girl, the main suspect from the first case resurfaced, prompting investigators to seek a conversation with him. It appeared that the two cases were still linked. Meanwhile, the police consulted a company called Parabon, which was the first in the world to create images of individuals based on their DNA profiles and develop advanced forensic research methods. They utilized a technique known as DNA phenotyping for this purpose. In 2016, probable images of the killers of both children were generated while DNA samples were still being collected from the remaining 160 men on the detectives list. This process was time-consuming, as the laboratory received batches of about 20 samples at a time. Unfortunately, despite the ongoing efforts, there were no matches. Just when it seemed the investigation might stall again, a promotion opportunity arose in the chief prosecutor's office. This presented a tough decision for Lindsay, who was still deeply invested in solving the cases of the two schoolgirls. Despite her doubts, she sent the last batch of DNA samples to the laboratory and ultimately decided to quit her job. She was convinced that nothing useful would be found and that the cases would remain unsolved. In May 2018, Lindsay received a call from the new detective, Gene Miller, who had taken over the investigation. He informed her that, nearly 32 years after the two murders, a DNA match had been found that identified the killer of 13-year-old Jennifer. To her surprise, the DNA pointed to Robert, the witness who had been running in the park, and had not yet been verified at that time. At the time of the murder, Robert was 60 years old. He had been a young man from Tacoma before moving to Illinois after the murders. What was surprising was that he had no criminal history. By all appearances, he was a law-abiding and decent citizen. After relocating, he entered into a relationship with a woman, and they had a daughter who was born with disabilities. The couple eventually separated, and Robert devoted himself to caring for his sick daughter, supporting her in every way possible. Those who knew him described him as hardworking, calm, and kind. After more than 30 years, the mask of anonymity was finally lifted. Robert Washburn was arrested on May 11, 2018, for the rape and murder of 13-year-old Jennifer Bastian. Following his arrest, he became extremely anxious. During the interrogation, he sweated profusely, soaking his clothes. Investigators interpreted this as a strong indication of his guilt. His reaction was typical of a captured criminal, and the arrest clearly shocked him, as he no longer expected to be apprehended after so many years. Robert maintained his innocence, claiming that the DNA match was a mistake. However, the evidence had been thoroughly checked multiple times, and no errors were found. Meanwhile, the case of Michelle, another victim, remained unsolved. A month after Robert's arrest, DNA tests were completed on 160 men, and none were identified as Michelle's killer. Subsequently, the police reached out to Parabon again. By analyzing genealogy and employing advanced DNA testing methods, they narrowed down the list of potential suspects to 2 brothers. To gather DNA samples for comparison, detectives faced challenges since they could not directly request samples from the suspects. Those would have to be provided voluntarily. To avoid alarming potential criminals, the investigators adopted a more tactical approach and began to follow the brothers. During this surveillance, one brother visited a restaurant and left behind a napkin. This allowed the restaurant staff to collect a DNA sample from him for analysis. Even if he was not responsible for the child's murder, the DNA sample could help exclude him from the suspect list, thereby allowing the investigation to proceed. Ultimately, the analysis of the napkin revealed a complete match with the DNA profile of Michelle's killer, identified as Summer Richar Har. At the time of the first murder, he was 34 years old. Surprisingly, he bore a striking resemblance to Robert and was regarded by everyone who knew him as a good person, with no prior criminal history. Harry was a well-respected doctor who worked for many years in a psychiatric hospital, known for his calm demeanor and restraint. He had never received a single complaint from patients, and no one from his social circle would ever label him a child killer. However, on June 20, 2018, he was arrested on charges of rape and murder of a woman named Shelley, which he denied. At that time, Robert was awaiting trial in 2019 for other charges. While waiting for his trial, Robert was imprisoned without bail. A few months later, he changed his story and confessed to strangling another woman, Jennifer, in hopes of getting a lighter sentence, but he avoided discussing the rape allegations entirely. Police suggested that Robert recognized the gravity of his actions and was unwilling to confront the ugliness of his crimes. Ultimately, he received a 20-year prison sentence. Interestingly, before the murder of Jennifer, Robert had tried to involve himself in the investigation of Michelle's case, appearing on the witness list months prior. Detectives concluded that he may have wanted to gain attention from the event, which profoundly affected him. This possibility helped explain the differences in the nature of his crimes. Unlike Harry, Robert was unable to commit acts of cruelty that exceeded those of Harry's alleged offenses. Robert has never commented on this matter. The trial of Ree Hart occurred in March 2022. His attorney worked hard to defend him, attempting to shift blame for the crime onto Robert. She argued that there had been mistakes in the evidence collection or examination at the crime scene. However, the prosecution maintained that there were no errors in matching the DNA profiles. The defense also tried to highlight Hart's mental health issues at the time of the attack, noting his traumatic childhood and a psychotic breakdown he experienced. He had long struggled with alcohol and substance abuse, contributing to his unstable mental state. At the end of the trial, Hart confessed to the murder. Despite his lawyer's efforts to argue that he was insane, these claims did not persuade the jury, which found him guilty. The court sentenced him to prison, a term that many felt was too lenient, especially since he had confessed. Interestingly, Hart's sentence was even shorter than Robert's, despite the fact that Michelle's murder was much more brutal. Nevertheless, there was a sense of relief that 2 dangerous criminals were finally behind bars. In May 2019, a new bill was introduced, named after Jennifer and Michelle, 2 girls who tragically lost their lives. Their parents have been advocating for a law in Washington state that broadens the range of criminal offenses, especially related to sexual assault.